When I was a young child, I used to go stay with my aunt every day after school. She, my aunt, lives in a beautiful farmhouse far on the outskirts of my town. She grew up in the blatant countryside and is a true woman of the land. She tends to chickens, ducks. She even has a few cows here and there, though they're just now dairy cows now. She gathers her own water from the rain and is the prime example of a self-sufficient lady, or what others refer to as a prepper. On one occasion, however, as a child, I must have been around 8 or 9, I encountered something terrible and deadly at her house. It was in the garden. The garden is large and has a whole array of flowers. The smells are intoxicating and are enough to make anybody fall for the allure of these flowers. It's in this place that the experience happened. It was springtime, so there was just an ethereal beauty surrounding the entire place. My aunt took really good care of her garden, and it looked beautiful. I was a boisterous 9-year-old boy, so I would spend much of my day kicking balls and running through the garden with my younger siblings. I know this experience might sound crazy, and I'm a very logical person. I came across your channel because I just spent evenings scrolling through YouTube, watching funny videos, and I thought, man, I wonder if this person would be interested at all in what happened to me as a kid. So I was saying, I was around 8 or 9. Well, my aunt had a bunch of chickens out back and wanted me to bring one in so she could slaughter it for dinner. I know, not very animal friendly or vegan, but I can't sugarcoat the story. I remember exactly what I was wearing. A little red t-shirt, yellow shorts, and blue boots. It was a little rainy too, so I had on a yellow raincoat. Before I grabbed the chicken, my aunt wanted me to feed the ducks too in her pond. The pond was near the bottom of the garden and was somewhere that I loved to go sit and be still. At that time, my father was a pretty bad alcoholic and would often come home and trash the house, screaming at my mom and starting fistfights in front of me, throwing furniture, and nearly choking her out. It was extremely traumatic and very toxic, for me as a kid especially, and so that's why I spent a lot of my time at my aunt's. I felt that it was a safe place for me, and the place I felt most still and serene was around her pond, watching the little ducks move quickly around the pond. On this day, however, I did not feel peaceful. As I stood there, throwing in little pieces of squished up bread, a gray cloud enveloped the sky, and it looked like it was going to start pouring soon. I panicked a little, as my aunt's house is only about 100 yards from the pond, and I knew if I got wet, she would be mad. I continued standing there, looking at the ducks, and noticed something very strange and ominous. In the corner of the pond, there was a little splash of blood, as if one of the ducks had been bleeding. I looked in the pond to see if I could see any more, but no, I didn't. At that moment, I noticed in the corner of the pond, one of the ducks, which were beautiful, delicate, had spots of blood all over its coat. It made me feel sick to my stomach, and I wondered what had happened. Had it been injured? Had someone did this? What was going on? My mind raced for an explanation, but I just continued staring. I attempted to reach out and stroke the duck that had a little blood on its coat, but it swam away, as if nervous of my touch. I tried to whisper out to it, "Baby sounds, it's okay, little guy," I cooed. I decided I should probably go in and alert my aunt, and as I stood up, I threw in the remaining bread. I hoped if at least the ducks get some nourishment, nothing bad could happen. Just as I got up, the hairs on the back of my neck stood up and seemed to expand into huge spikes. My hand is even shaky now as I recall this memory. Before me, at the side of the pond, on my aunt's flowers, was a large reptile, at least 15 feet long, a massive thing. It had green scaly skin and large spiky feet, which also seemed to have fangs. It was absolutely bewildering and horrific to look at. I attempted to shout, but no words could leave my mouth. I was awestruck by the terrible creature before me. It looked vicious and monstrous, and I knew instantly it was responsible for the blood residue in the pond on the ducks. What was this beast? I thought. Did my aunt know about this? Surely not. She would never keep such a creature. The creature turned to me and stared at me with red slits for eyes, which glare a menacing look, as if it could bolt its tongue out and eat me there and then. I screamed at the top of my lungs and ran back to my aunt. I didn't turn my head until I got in, and the creature was gone. I can only assume that it slithered back to the swamp behind my aunt's pond. She felt my head and could feel the streams of cold sweat running down my brow. She knew I was not lying. It was the weirdest thing, and that night, she'd made me some hot tea and allowed me to sleep with her. Later that year, my aunt died of a sudden heart attack. She was distraught at the time because most of her farm animals were getting sick and dying, or just disappearing altogether, which was odd. Environmental health officers and veterinarians said it was the pollution in the air, but I felt this creature had a part to play in it. Whatever this was, it was monstrous. It didn't look like an alligator, but more like a mutated giant lizard. But I don't know, it's hard for me to describe because I've never seen such a weird-looking creature. It was there one moment, and then after I ran away, it was gone. I almost wonder if it was planning on sneaking up on me and devouring me whole, because it was right in a spot that had I not turned to look at it, I would have never seen it, and it could have came right up on me. Anyway, my aunt later on that year had a heart attack like I said, but it was again because I think she was just going through so much stress of losing a lot of her livestock and her prized cows, which were disappearing, somehow, and they couldn't find them anywhere, no traces of their body. So again, I don't really know how to summarize it all, but I just know that I'm not crazy, and this did happen to me. I know what I saw, and it was real. When I was at college in the early 2000s, I spent a lot of my time partying. I'm 39 now, married with 2 kids, and immensely happy with my life. I know I drank too much back then. Hey, I may have even smoked a little weed from time to time, but generally, I was a good kid. I'm a Midwesterner, and so I grew up knowing that I wanted to make my mom proud and my dad proud, so I knew how to stay away from the wrong crowd. Well, I tried. But one night, I was in my dorm, and this guy was going around the hallway knocking on people's doors. I heard the muttering, and I had no real idea what he was saying. I was working on my desktop at the time, on an assignment, and hoped he wouldn't knock on mine. But of course he did. This guy had black hair, dark eyes, and a long leather jacket. He had a blank stare and some shady-looking eyes, but he held out his arm and showed me something. He had some ecstasy. He asked me if I wanted to buy it, and of course I said no. At the time, weed was the only drug I would have ever tried, and even that made me feel really sleepy. I shut the door in the guy's face. I had the strangest feeling he was angry at me. His stare alone was just cold and clinical, as if he could have killed me there and then, and walked away, feeling nothing. I guess to be a drug dealer, you have to separate all your human emotions and just focus on making money. After he left, I went in the kitchen and talked about it with my roommate. He wondered who had let this guy into our dorm. It was totally risky and a real hazard. I mean, if he found a vulnerable girl, he could have drugged and raped her. We felt really concerned, but we didn't want to alert the campus authorities, as we had already had a problem after a drunk guy trashed our place. The campus authorities told us if there were any more problems, they would evict us. At 19 years old, I couldn't have imagined anything worse than going back to live with my folks. I was an independent guy now, working hard and enjoying having a cold beer in the evening, waking up when I wanted and eating whatever I wanted. Me and my buddy decided to keep it quiet. We would just keep our eyes open for anything else unusual. We would also tell the rest of the hallway to be alert and not to get too drunk until we could find out more about this guy and who and why he targeted us. That night, I went to bed at around 11 p.m. I was slumped, and I had a big test the next day. I woke up at around 2 in the morning and heard shouting coming from outside my window. I groaned as I got up, my feet touching the cold floor, and pulled back the curtain to see what was going on. The same guy from earlier was outside my room, just about 10 yards from my bedroom. He was talking to a girl who looked to be drunk, and she was sitting with her face in her lap on the pavement. I felt sick. I knew I had to do something. I pulled on my housecoat and the first pair of shoes I could find. Even though I just had boxers and a housecoat on, I knew there wasn't time to get dressed. This guy was clearly in danger and could potentially die if she took drugs. This guy was a bad guy, and I wanted to give him a piece of my mind. I went outside to confront him, but when I turned around the corner to where my bedroom faces, I couldn't see anybody. I couldn't even see the girl. I panicked. I looked around everywhere. At that moment, my eyes expanded to the size of footballs. A huge reptile-like creature was staring at me, standing in the exact same spot as the girl had been minutes earlier. This thing looked like a perfect mix of a human being and a lizard in one. This thing was huge and tall, standing at about 10 feet, with slimy green scaly skin and a bald head and enormous yellow eyes. I felt sick, like somebody had shot me right in the stomach. My shoulders became heavy, and my breathing became slow, and I honestly felt I was going to collapse from a massive stroke. The creature continued staring at me, and I raised my hands as if surrendering in an attempt to appease this thing, what I would consider a demon to this day, just in case it charged at me. I couldn't take in what I was seeing, but I knew in the darkest parts of my mind this wasn't a dream. The wind was blowing, and I was aware of my sheer vulnerability. My mind raced. What had happened? Was this a prank? Or perhaps I had unknowingly taken ecstasy, and this was all an hallucination? Nothing added up, but I felt mentally well enough. I did not feel like I was high on drugs. I knew what I was seeing was real, and it was just too animalistic and vicious to be another human dressed up. The creature kind of made a scoffing sound at me, and then slowly, without breaking eye contact, retreated back into the bushes before finally disappearing entirely. Well, I say bushes, but they were more like hedges, because they engulfed this entire thing as it stood back into it. I went back inside and poured myself a hot cup of coffee. I picked the phone up to call the police, but then decided against it. I felt I would appear crazy, and I knew if they did a drug test, they might find traces of marijuana or alcohol, and I didn't want to get a bad rap or record. I had a really bright future ahead of me with lots of promise, and I did not want that to be ruined. At the time, I don't know exactly what this was. Was it a creature, or did I see a demon? I wasn't sure. It wasn't until the past few years that with the capabilities of the internet and all the resources I have that I really kind of began looking into it, and I could sum up that I think I may have had encountered some kind of reptilian being, but I don't know. I'm only speculating, and I'm submitting this story to you so that you can give me the answers that I seek.